This is Raceway Ministries Today. Thanks for joining us for Raceway Ministries Today. In just a moment, we'll be sharing with you the latest of what's going on in the world of Christian ministry and outreach through the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Raceway Ministries Today. We're glad to have you in on the podcast this afternoon. We're just past the midpoint of the month of May. Lots of stuff going on in the racing world, and National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries has been doing our best to stay on top of some gospel outreach in the middle of all the racing activity. So thank you for joining us. If you need to find out more about National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, you can go to our website, racewayministries.org. Or you can visit our Facebook page, National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, and then we have a YouTube channel that goes by the same name, and you can go there and find other podcasts, and at the website and at the Facebook page you can find out the latest of what's going on in the world of Raceway Ministries. I'm Roger Marsh. I'm the Director of the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, and we are absolutely delighted today to have with us one of the leaders of one of the teams that has been around for a long time. Jim McBride is the director of Delaware Raceway Ministries, and they've been actively involved at Dover International Speedway for a long time. Jim currently serves as facilities manager at Skycroft Conference Center in Middletown, Maryland, which is owned and operated by the Baptist Convention of Maryland, Delaware. And as I already indicated, Jim currently serves as director of Delaware Raceway Ministries, and they just came out of a very active weekend of racing and ministry up there in Dover. So, Jim, welcome to the podcast, and it's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me on, Roger.
Yeah, you bet. I know you guys have been very, very busy coming out of an action-packed race weekend there at Dover. Good racing always goes on up there at Dover. I've always been impressed with it, and the fans love it too. I've heard from the drivers that it's a little bit like a roller coaster. You're up high in the bank curves, and then you go down a little bit into the straightaways and back up into the next bank curve. But apparently you guys had some drivers that negotiated that pretty well this past weekend. Ty Gibbs won the ARCA race, Austin Cindric won the Xfinity race, and Alex Bowman took home the trophy for the Monster Cup Series. So great racing, and congratulations to all of those guys. Now, I want to talk with you a little bit about the raceway itself, Jim. It's called the Monster Mile. I believe it opened in 1969 is what I've learned, and it's hosted NASCAR races, IndyCar races, ARCA, USAC, lots of different series in and out of there at the Monster Mile. I want to ask you, how did that reputation and nickname develop, Monster Mile? How did all that happen?
So, Roger, one of the former CEOs of Dover Downs, Dennis McGlenn, nicknamed it the Monster Mile because of how tough the track was on both the drivers and their equipment.
Oh, okay.
And the racing is so bumper to bumper, side by side. You mentioned the high banks. There tended to be a lot of accidents and a lot of broken equipment. So it sort of became known as the Monster Mile because the track just ate up the competitors.
Okay. Well, not only the competitors, but the equipment as well. And I'll tell you, I've seen some pretty serious accidents there where some equipment got torn up pretty good. You know, you typically think of the big one being at Daytona and Talladega, but I've seen some pretty big accidents there at Dover that have taken out several cars in one wreck, and they get pretty beat up. So I can see how it gained that reputation to being the Monster Mile. Now, what about Miles the Monster? You know, I was looking at a picture the other day of the raceway, and it's got a different car up in Miles' hand, that big statue out there. It's got a different car in it than what are in my pictures that I took there a few years ago. In fact, I went back and looked at some of my pictures from previous visits to Dover, and Miles the Monster has a Dodge up there in his hand. So I don't know what he has in his hand now, but I'm sure it's not a Dodge. But that is a landmark up there in that area. So what's the story behind Miles the Monster? How did that happen?
Miles the Monster became the official mascot of Dover Downs, and the statue was built in the year 2000. It was a way for the track to help attract even non-race fans, but Miles the Monster statue is the center of what Dover Downs calls their fan zone.
Oh.
And around Miles the Monster is where you have your souvenir haulers, your food vendors, but they also rope in family events such as concerts and various activities throughout the weekend.
Okay.
Miles is 46 feet tall. The reason why the cars change is because they put an actual life-size car in his hand of the car that won the previous race at the track.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay. Very good. So it's kind of similar to Daytona, where they take the winner of the Daytona 500 and put their car on display. So same thing happens there with Miles the Monster. Hey, that's pretty awesome. I know one thing. When I was up there before, it became a photo op location for everybody. Everybody wanted to get their picture made out there with Miles the Monster. So what a great landmark. I appreciate you sharing some of that history. Rich history there at Dover, and also some pretty rich history for Raceway Ministries. I've gone back and done a little bit of research from some previous notes that I'd taken from the history of the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, and discovered that your dad launched the ministry there in 1993. Does that sound about right in terms of the year?
That is correct, because this was year 28.
Okay. All right. Good. So y'all been there 28 years, having begun in 1993. And by the way, congratulations on the longevity of the ministry there. You know, I went back and looked at some pictures that I had found. One of the founders of Raceway Ministries years ago, Ed Quattlebaum from down in Darlington, South Carolina, sent me a big packet several years ago that had numerous pictures of some of the early meetings of Raceway Ministries people. And your dad was right in the thick of that. And if I'm not mistaken, at that time he was serving as a director of missions there in the Dover area for the state of Delaware. And so he and Frank Stark and Ed Quattlebaum and a lot of those guys that were helping to launch Raceway Ministry, John Fox and some others, were right there in the thick of it all. And so, in fact, whenever they organized, John Fox from Virginia was the first president of the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. I believe your dad stepped in then as the second president of the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, and then I followed your dad. And boy, what an honor that was to be able to step into his shoes. And he filled me in on a lot of things about Raceway Ministries and told me a little bit of the development of it up to that point. And it was a great, great help. And I have a lot of respect for your dad and love him dearly. And equally have respect for you, having picked up the baton to kind of carry things on there at Dover. Launched in 93, we've had NFRM annual meetings there in the Dover area in 1999, then again in 2011. So, you know, we've been up there a lot, and I've always enjoyed coming up there for race events. I think I've been up there for 3 or 4 race weekends that you guys have had through the years. I guess my question to you would be, how did you get involved in that? Obviously a connection with your dad, but what are the details about you getting involved and then ultimately becoming the director of Delaware Raceway Ministries?
Well, Roger, I actually was sort of the impetus to my dad starting it.
Really?
I've been involved with it from the very beginning.
Okay.
My father was a pastor of a church, and when he decided to become the director of missions for Delaware, I was in college at that time.
Okay.
So the second summer he was the director of missions, I moved home from college to spend the summer at home, and we were in the car driving past Dover Downs.
All right.
And as many of you who've ever had a teenager for a child or grandchild might know, when teenagers get to that sophomore year of college, they start getting maybe a little full of themselves, and I was full of myself. So
okay. All right.
We're driving past the racetrack, and I looked over and I said, "Dad, you're the director of missions for Delaware, right?" And he said, "Yes." So I said, "So that means you're in charge of any of the Southern Baptist ministry work that goes on in Delaware, right?" He said, "Yes."
Okay.
I said, "Well, what do you got going on at the racetrack?" And he said, "Nothing."
Ah.
I said, "Why not?" And he says, "Well, I never really thought about it and didn't really know if it would be the type of event for churches to get involved in. I've heard a lot of the fans can be sort of rowdy and maybe drink a little bit too much." And I looked him in the eyes and I said, "Dad, I'm a race fan."
Ah.
And out of that conversation, he made phone calls to some of the gentlemen you've already mentioned, Ed Quattlebaum and Frank Stark. And one thing led to another. So a year later, he and I went to the first race at Dover, first race of the year at Dover, to sort of just scope things out and check it out.
Okay.
And we started in September of 1993.
Okay.
After that conversation and after visiting. And I've always prided myself for a long time on being my dad's right-hand man and sort of firefighter. I always stayed behind the scenes and tried to put out whatever fires came up and let him take the lead.
Yeah.
But as he has advanced in years and retired from being a director of missions, the baton needed to be passed.
Sure.
And I accepted it. And the funny thing is now my son is 20. And when he was about 17, he asked me when the time came if I was going to pass the baton to him. So we're creating a legacy, hopefully.
Man, you are. You're working on a third generation deal here. Wow, that's awesome. Well, it fits right in with NASCAR. It's a family deal, and often the responsibilities get passed down from one petty to another, that kind of thing. So, man, you guys fit the mold. That's really awesome. I had no idea that that's how things had unfolded up there. But I got to tell you, I really love your dad and really respect him. He's always been a hard worker. Not only helped blaze the trail with getting Delaware Raceway Ministries involved nationally with us, but he's had a lot of great ideas, done a lot of great training through the year. 1999, the NFRM annual meeting was up there in Delaware, and that was my second meeting to attend before I stepped into a leadership role with NFRM. I was director of Raceway Ministries at Texas Motor Speedway at the time, and I learned a lot from your dad. He had some great insights. He developed a lot of things there at Raceway Ministries there at Dover, and had a lot of respect for him, and still do. Love him very much. And he's been a hard worker, and he's passed on a great legacy to you, and you're doing a great job as well. So, man, my hat's off to you guys, and hope the third generation goes as strong as the first two generations have there in leadership there at Dover. Well, listen, I know prior to the pandemic that we've experienced over the last year or so, ministry was very active up there at Dover. I mean, I've been up there at some weekends of racing ministry when your dad about wore me out. We had pancake breakfast, we had music concerts, we've handed out literature, we've staffed information booths, we even had off Speedway property concerts in shopping center parking lots where we, were able to minister to fans out there. I mean, it's just been unbelievable, the things that have been done up there. What are some of the other things that would give everyone a full picture of what a typical Raceway Ministry weekend looks like at Dover before the pandemic? Kind of paint the picture for us of how big ministry is on a pre-COVID race weekend there at Dover.
Sure, Roger. We've done many things over I should say 26 years since the last two have been sort of a COVID world.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a lot. We've also, we've been blessed. We've had puppet ministries from some of our local churches who have puppets. We've had youth groups come out and do face painting.
Yeah.
We've done Pinewood Derbies. Our Raceway Ministry had a Pinewood Derby track, and we would buy the pre-made cars, let the fans paint them. And then after the Saturday night race, we would hold a Pinewood Derby and let the fans race each other.
Okay.
We've joined in with other groups and done concerts.
Okay.
We've gone to Dover Air Force Base and done concerts there, and taken some of the Christian drivers have gone to Dover Air Force Base to meet with some of the Air Force personnel and have dinners, and then they give tours of their cars and the Air Force gives tours of their big C-5 airplanes.
Oh, awesome.
We've had many, many, many different partnerships as things have evolved over time. Actually, where Miles the Monster, who we've already discussed, is in that fan zone, used to be the area where we were located. Well, when Dover in the year 2000 decided to create that whole fan zone and get rid of that open field, we got moved into one of the campground sections. So we had to sort of shift, change up, do some different things, and it took us a couple of years to get our footing. But our primary focus at Dover Downs Raceway Ministry is to build relationships.
Okay, good.
One of the things we have noticed year in and year out is we have repeat fans. We've had fans who've been coming to our events since year one, 28 years ago, and they still come. They look for us. So whether it's cooking pancakes on Sunday morning before chapel service, or there's about 5 years in a row, we got a 250-pound pig and smoked it on a smoker and gave out free dinner before the Saturday night concert.
Oh, man, awesome.
So,
wow.
there's nothing like cooking a pig for 24 hours in the crowd that it draws. So
that sounds like fun. It sounds like some good eating right there. Wow.
Yes, sir.
Well, you guys have really pulled out all the stops up there. And I want to encourage our listeners, particularly if we have some of the listeners who have never been involved in Raceway Ministries before, and maybe you're getting ready to step into it at one of our new starts. This is great information for you to understand. Not only the scope of the activities, but one of the important things that you mentioned, Jim, is very significant, and that is building relationships. You know, what we do out there at the Raceway, it's not hard evangelism. I wouldn't call it that. I'd call it rather soft. It's opportunistic. It's evangelism that takes place whenever you have an opportunity to get engaged in a conversation, maybe sitting down at a table with somebody at that pancake breakfast, or maybe while someone is painting the face of a child, you get into a dialogue with maybe the parents or the child themselves. A lot of it is opportunistic in terms of waiting for an opportunity to engage in a good conversation where you can share the faith. Now, granted, worship services, you know, we preach and we sing, and obviously that can be some pretty hard evangelism, but as far as backing people up to the fence with the Bible and beating them up with Bible verses and things like that, we have to remember that we're guests on the property of a secular entertainment environment. And so, you know, it's not like we're totally restricted from being able to share the gospel, but we take care, and we do it very carefully, and we're very sensitive to the people's needs. So I'm glad you mentioned that about building relationships. And it is true that the fans come back again and again, and many of the people that I've interviewed in these podcasts have repeated the same thing that you just said. The fans come back and they're looking for you, and that says something huge about your effectiveness and about your sensitivity to their needs. They want to find you, and they want to depend upon you through the weekend, and that means they have open hearts and listening ears. So, man, I appreciate you pointing that out. Now, obviously, things have changed greatly since COVID came on the scene, since we've been involved in this pandemic. So I really want to kind of engage in a conversation with you about what did ministry look like this past race weekend there at Dover. Obviously, very different from previous years. I guess my question would be, what kind of crowd size did you have? What were the extent of the COVID restrictions that you guys experienced there? What role did the Speedway ask you guys to play in terms of ministry? You know, those sort of things. So just kind of unpackage that for us and tell us, what did ministry look like this past race weekend there at Dover?
Sure. Dover was very impacted by the governor of Delaware and his office.
Okay.
Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, when COVID started, the governors of those three states sort of formed an alliance and have been among the slower moving states for any of you who have been following restrictions. So
okay. Wow.
Delaware, until this Friday, the 21st coming up, still has mask restrictions, limited indoor seating, all of those things. They've not come out of that yet. So
okay. Very interesting.
Dover Speedway and their personnel been a lot of negotiating back and forth with the state government, and of course kept us abreast of situations. So one of the things that made ministry look very different is the governor would not allow anything to take place in the campgrounds or anywhere outside of Dover Downs itself that would attract more than 10 people in a small area.
Oh my goodness.
Well, you can't serve a pancake breakfast or you can't have a concert if you're only going to be able to reach 10 people.
Yeah.
So for a long time, we did not think we were going to be able to do anything at the racetrack, but the track kept negotiating and going back and forth. So back in January, at the National Fellowship virtual meeting, we were challenged to not give up and do whatever we could to stay in front of the track, keep our face there. And we've been out there. We've had a great relationship with our track personnel, and they want us to be there. So finally, we just said, okay, we can't do what we normally do. We want to stay involved. How can we help you, Dover Downs? What can we do to help you this particular race?
Wow. Let me pause right there, Jim, because another excellent point that you make. You know, we're there to serve. You know, we're not there to dictate to them what we're going to do. Most of the time when we step into these environments, the key is to build those good trust relationships with that staff and then ask them what they need and then step into that role and then figure out a way to make that a ministry strategy. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out. Very, very important. Now, you guys have had great relationships through the years up there at Dover with the staff, and I commend you guys for that. But based on those relationships, you were able to step in for this race event and just simply ask them, what do you want us to do? So what was their response?
Well, they told us that the state was going to allow them to have a crowd of 20,000.
Okay.
Normally Dover has a little over 100,000.
Yeah.
And the state was still going to require masks, social distancing. But the state said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to allow you to have the race, but we got to do two things. First thing we're going to do is we're going to have walk-up vaccination clinics on Saturday, Sunday, and we're going to vaccinate people that want to be vaccinated.
Okay.
The second thing we're going to do is we are going to provide you, Dover Downs, with 30,000 bags of PPE equipment that we want you to distribute to the race fans.
Okay, good.
Jim McBride says, for Downs, how can I serve you? Dover Downs says, I got 30,000 bags of PPE I'm supposed to give away to keep the governor happy.
All of a sudden, you got a job to do.
All of a sudden, my group had a job to do. So what they did is, at Dover, just like with many, many tracks, they have information tents set up around the track to help people find their gate, find their parking, find whatever they need to find. So they decided that these PPE bags would be best distributed through those information booths.
Okay, good.
There's a volunteer group that normally helps them at these information booths, but because of COVID, decided they weren't going to help this race. A month before the race, Dover Downs contacts me and says, you asked what you can do, this is what we need you to do. We need you to run these information booths. I said, okay, well, you've got to give me time to see if I can get enough people. How many people are you talking?
Yeah.
Because we got 4 tents, 7 hours a day, 4 people at each tent at least. So now I've got to come up with 16 people who can work 21 hours Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or some part of. Called a real quick meeting of my ministry team. Ministry team's like, hey, we got to do this. We've got to do it. The track wants us to do it. Let's do it. Had about 75% of my normal volunteers step up and work at least a 4-hour shift. We went out to some of our local churches and were able to get additional people who were, well, you know what? I'm not going to go sit in that campground, but I'll give you 4 hours to help you in your information booth and hand out PPE and meet people.
Man, there you go.
So got a hold of the track, and we've always had a positive relationship with the track, but I will tell you, after pulling this off with a month's notice, our view and our track personnel's eyes has been elevated even higher than it ever was. He sent me a thank you text after the race and said he heard nothing but good things and that our group knocked it out of the park. And if we want to do it going forward, it's our job now. Now, here's where that is significant, Roger.
Okay.
My Raceway ministry has been in a transition period of moving away from being funded by the local Baptist Association to trying to move out and be its own 501c3, which means your own fundraising.
Yeah, right.
What Dover Downs, this was their offer to me. I didn't negotiate this. They said for every hour a person volunteers under your umbrella, we will donate $9.75 back to your ministry.
Okay, so not necessarily working for pay, but a donation.
Correct. So this weekend netted my ministry, which has not had any funding source other than fan donations at the races for the last 2 years, almost a $2,100 donation from Dover Downs, which will help fund us for our next race.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, that's just God, because that's not something, like I say, I didn't negotiate that. The tractor said, hey, we want to do this for you because you helped us out of a tough spot.
Well, let me make a couple of comments there. One, you said you guys have gained your own 501c3 status. Is that correct?
We have applied for it, yes. We have not been approved yet.
Okay, so you got that in process. That's very important for our ministry teams across the country to understand. If you're not connected with somebody under their group exemption as a 501c3, you need to be, because it certainly does encourage donations on the part of people who want to give and who want to be supported. So I think that's a very important point to make. The other thing that I want to point out is that typically, and this is something that we teach and something that we've preached for years to our Raceway Ministries people, we don't depend upon the folks who are on the receiving end of our ministry to support our ministry. And by that, I simply mean, you don't go to a mission field, for example, somewhere in the deep jungles of some foreign country, and then depend upon the natives there to support your ministry financially. You get financial support back home from your missions organization. And typically, we have promoted that in Raceway Ministries work. We don't depend upon the fans entirely for donations to us for us to be able to survive. Our support needs to come from churches, or it needs to come from denominational organizations, and then we just go out and minister free of charge without any burden on the part of the people that we're trying to reach. Now, obviously, if a fan takes a ride on a golf cart and they stuff a $10 bill in your pocket, you might offend them if you don't let them make that donation. And if it's okay with Speedway for you to receive it, I don't have a big issue with that. I also don't have a big issue if the Raceway itself comes along and says, you know what, we like what you're doing. We want to support what you're doing. And we're not going to pay you wages, but how about a donation? You guys are a 501c3, let us make a donation. That's a win-win for them. It's a win for you too. That comes, though, not because you expected that compensation, not because you went and made a deal with them and said, we'll do it for that compensation. It comes because you have built trusting relationships through the years, and now they in return want to support what you do. I think that's an incredible affirmation of a good relationship with the staff there. So, I just congratulate you guys and am thankful with you to the Lord for that step of them wanting to be supportive of you. It speaks well of your relationships with them over a long period of time, and it speaks well of your being available to them for this particular race weekend to help them with something that they really didn't have a choice. They had to do it, and you happen to be the guy in the group that stepped in to make that happen, and looks like God's blessing y'all with some great rewards. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
That's awesome. What other things did y'all do, and what else did you learn in this weekend? Obviously, one of the things you just mentioned to me is that y'all have better relationships with that staff now than you ever have had before, and there's more mutual appreciation and respect there than you've ever had before. What else came out of the weekend? Did you have any memorable ministry experiences? Any other things that you learned during the NASCAR weekend?
Well, let me mention maybe a couple things.
Okay.
Once more, I want to go back to this whole situation with the track. So as we were talking about what is this going to look like, I said, well, the gentleman that we work with at the track, his name is Pat. I said, Pat, I'll get you the people, but I'm going to need to be able to get them to the bathroom. I'm going to need to be able to get them food, all of this type of stuff.
Yeah.
So one thing that we've always been given access to the track and limited passes and things to do. He says, you tell you what, I'm going to get you a vendor pass, which means you can drive your people right up to their locations up until 9 o'clock in the morning.
Awesome.
Then nobody had to walk 2 miles from a campground or a parking area to get there.
Yeah.
So he said, I'm also going to give all your people, and this is what I want to drive home, and give all your people an employee pass so that they can come inside the gates of the track and get to the real bathrooms, the non-porta potties. So why is that important? That in itself isn't important, but when we went to pick up the passes, he had already printed on them Delaware Racing Ministries. All the other employee passes just had employee. They took the time. I didn't negotiate this. I didn't ask for it. Went by to pick up my 20 passes. And they had taken the time to make sure that they put Delaware Racing Ministries on it so that every fan we interacted with that entire weekend knew we were representing Delaware Racing Ministries.
Wow, that's awesome. That is awesome.
Again, that is a God thing that a secular, for-profit, publicly traded company, Dover Downs International Speedway Corporation, did without being prompted or asked. That's just God. So as far as a ministry experience to share would go, what we were able to do, we still had a presence in the campground. The campgrounds are where it all is in Dover. So a couple of my volunteers pulled their camper on. And so when they left after working 8 hours Friday, 8 hours Saturday, went back to their camper, they set up a fire pit. Remember, the track told us we could attract 10 people.
Yeah.
So we had some of the New Testament racing theme Bibles we'd purchased from National Fellowship, some of our literature. They had those things. They had a fire. Told you it's all about building relationships. As soon as they pulled in and set up, some of the people we have relationships were coming up with hey, my grandma's doing better. Thanks for praying for her. And these are
There
people
you
who come
go.
up to you and they say, hey, I don't go to church, but I know you'll pray for this if I tell you to pray. And so we're able to sit around a fire pit at a campground at Dover Downs and have prayer with someone who will never step foot, most likely, in the foot of a church, but they know that somebody loves them. They're getting fed the word, and they're getting shown in action, not just lip service, that we're there year in and year out. And we were still able to have that presence in the campground and continue to nurture those relationships that we've been building year in and year out.
Oh, you bet. And you know what? You never know. They may set foot in a church simply because you took the time to show some compassion and be genuine to them and meet their real needs. You know, that might develop into a relationship with Christ, and that might turn into full involvement and engagement in a church somewhere, and they may be the next one stepping out and getting involved in ministry somewhere. You never know. Well, you know, Jim, those are blessings that only God could provide. But I want to suggest something to you. Those blessings have come to you because you guys have been faithful, you've been dependable, you've been responsible, you've been accessible, and you've done everything you can to say yes to God when opportunities have come. And I'm convinced that when we say yes to those opportunities in true obedience to the Lord, it gets the attention of even people that are out there in the non-Christian world, in the secular business world, and it helps to build credibility for Christian people, and it opens doors of opportunity for ministry. So I think God has just rewarded y'all's faithfulness and commitment in lots of different ways. Any other takeaways that you might have from the weekend?
I will tell you, as I said, I've been involved with this ministry for now 28 years.
Okay.
And I learned something very important this weekend.
Okay, good. Share it.
Don't ever doubt what can be accomplished when you rely on God.
Yeah.
So I told you I had a very small amount of time to come up with volunteers. So here I am on Thursday. I live 3 hours away from the track now with my job that I took 3 years ago.
Right.
A lot of stress going in. Okay, I've got this many people for these 4 hours, trying to create teams and get everybody where I get. So as I'm getting close to leaving on Thursday, either due to some medical reasons or one of the pastors who was going to help us had to drop out and do a funeral, I had multiple people drop out at the track.
Oh, my goodness.
One of my team leaders texted me and said, Jim, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but my pastor can't come now. He's got to do a funeral. She texted me again 10 seconds later and said, not today, Satan. You're not going to win.
Yeah.
Get to the track Thursday night to try to find all my locations. Can't find 2 of my locations that they told me I had a map. I knew exactly where I was supposed to be. Can't find them. Show up to the track Friday morning, get with our contact. He goes, yeah, we moved some things around. Now 2 of your tents are right beside each other. And by the way, you don't have to do this location. I got somebody who works for me full time to do it. And they moved 2 of our tents side by side and put a 3rd one like 100 yards away. And then I had a 4th one the other side of the track. God knew that I lost 3 people that were supposed to work on Friday and had 2 tents put side by side. So now I can man 2 tents with 6 people instead of needing 4 at each different site.
Wow.
And that text I got just reminded me to put it in God's hands and not worry about the small stuff. God's got it.
Yeah. Well, I love that text that you got. Not today, Satan.
Right.
That's great. Well, you know, we need not be discouraged whenever those challenges come along. You know, when you're dealing with things this big, a lot of little things are going to jump up and get you. And that's when you just have to remember that God's at work. You know, I remember several years ago I read Oswald Chambers' devotional book, My Utmost for His Highest. And one of the sentences that I underlined in that book, and I've always remembered this, was a phrase that Oswald Chambers uses, and he says, God is the engineer of circumstances. And, you know, back behind the scene, in ways that we cannot understand and definitely can't see, God is managing things and arranging things. And boy, it sounds like he was busy at work even as you were on your way to the raceway trying to figure out how in the world are we going to make this work. God had it covered. That is just incredible. Wow, what a takeaway. Thank you for sharing that, Jim. That's awesome. Well, listen, what about plans going forward? You guys obviously are going to have race weekends on down the way. So if COVID comes to a close and the Delaware region up there opens up a little bit more, what's ministry going to look like next time you guys are there at Dover, do you think?
Well, we have some plans and some dreams, and I think that we will accomplish them. As far as Dover Downs itself goes, we're hoping next race that we'll be able to go back to giving away some of our free food, having a free concert, doing some some of the things that we are known for,
Good.
some of the things that we are used to doing.
Okay.
Our ministry specifically, as it applies to Delaware Raceway Ministry in Dover Downs, is we want to have a presence in every single campground around the racetrack. Right now, we have a presence in 2 of our different campgrounds. There are 12 campgrounds.
Okay.
So we've got some growing to do there.
Yeah.
One of the other things we are looking at doing is there are several small local racetracks and drag strips very close to Dover.
Okay.
And we are trying to start the process of making some inroads and trying to find some churches local to those tracks that we can partner with and help and try to expand Delaware Racing Ministries. That's why we call it Delaware, not Dover.
Yeah,
because we want to expand outside of just being at Dover Downs.
Okay, good.
One of the other things for especially any of you other raceway ministries out there, Dover's used to having 2 races a year. Now that we've given our second race to Nashville, we only have 1.
Yeah.
My team has committed to going to another racetrack at least once per year and helping another raceway ministry, because we're used to doing it twice a year. Now we only have 1 race.
Good.
So we have a free weekend.
Okay.
So I'll be waiting for you guys to contact me for 2022.
All right, good. Well, we've got some places that we need to restart ministry. We've got Indianapolis and Pocono and Phoenix and several of them. So, man, that's something to keep in mind right there. Now, you mentioned Nashville. Nashville is part of Dover Motorsports, and they've got a NASCAR event coming up here in June, and we're in the midst of corresponding with their staff down there and working with them to get some things going. And it looks like at this point we're going to be able to do information booths and do some golf cart delivery of the fans, and they're giving us an opportunity to have a presence in one of their campgrounds to have a hospitality tent and do a Sunday morning church service and breakfast, although we're going to have to serve store-bought prepackaged food there at the breakfast. But great opportunity, and right now I think we're trying to gather about 30 to 35 volunteers, and we currently have about 25. So if any of your guys up there, I think I've already added a couple of your Dover people to our email list so that they can get in on the information. And we need to encourage all of our other listeners, if they need assistance out there at some of their Raceway Ministry locations, keep Dover group in mind, Delaware Raceway Ministries. And I'll let you share your contact information here in just a moment, Jim. Well, let me ask you this. From your perspective, what are a couple of key components to make Raceway Ministries work effective? There's lots of strategies, there's lots of ideas. In your mind, what are a couple of key things that people need to know if they want to be effective in doing ministry at a raceway?
From my personal experience, there's 3 things.
Okay.
I'm going to go in reverse order of importance. All 3 are important.
Okay.
But I'm going to go in reverse order.
Perfect.
Number 3, you have to have people that love the Lord working with your team.
Yep.
Second, you have to be in open communication year-round, not just the week before and the week after, but year-round with your track's leadership and the people who make the decisions on whether you can be there or not and what you can do when you're there.
Boy, that's a great point. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah.
And absolutely the most important thing is it must be Christ-centered. You must pray about it. You must put God in the middle of it. And unlike me sometimes, listen when he tells you what to do. Don't doubt that he's going to take care of it, but make sure that Christ is the reason you're there, that you're not there for you. You're there to share the message of our Savior.
Well, amen. Boy, you're exactly right. It's easy to get caught up in the logistics of how to pull the event off and get all the volunteers there, make sure everybody's trained, what they need to do and all that. And sometimes it's very easy to let the Christ-centered outreach ministry aspect of it get lost in all the shuffle. But that has to be number 1. And you are so accurate. That's got to be the priority. Wow, what a great set of guidelines and simple rules to follow to make sure ministry is effective. Well, listen, I just can't thank you enough, Jim. Man, for your leadership there, for your involvement through the years, for all the friendship that you've shown toward me through the years and the support that you've shown for Raceway Ministries. We are so grateful for that, and I'm very grateful that you're in the leadership position there for Delaware Raceway Ministries. I want to make sure that you give your contact information to people, so what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Sure, I'll give you both an email and my direct cell phone number for text or calls.
All right.
The email is simple. It's my name, Jim, Jim, McBride, McBride, Jr., the abbreviation for Junior.
Okay.
jm@yahoo.com. So
right.
Jim McBride Jr. at Yahoo. And my cell phone number is 443-988-8444. And I can get text or phone calls.
Okay. All right. Good. So if anybody out there would like to take Jim up on his offer to get some of the folks from Delaware Raceway Ministries involved in helping at your event, Jim McBride Jr., all one word, at yahoo.com is his email, and phone number 443-988-8444. All right, very good. Any final thoughts, Jim?
I just want to thank everybody out there who does Raceway Ministry, whether this is your first year doing it or whether you've been doing it. And I know people have been doing it longer than I have. When we started this ministry, we reached out to some of you. We visited some of you. You helped us, and you helped us get going. And as you've heard, I hope my passion for this ministry and the legacy that it's creating. I just want to thank everybody for following their passion and for following the call that God put on their heart to be involved in this ministry. We all do it differently, but we all do it for the same reason, and that's to serve our Heavenly Father.
Amen. Oh, that's a great word. Well, thank you so much, Jim. For all of our listeners, we've been visiting today with Jim McBride. Jim is the director of Delaware Raceway Ministries, and they have just come out of a race weekend with NASCAR and ARCA in town at the Dover International Speedway. And Jim has shared with us some very, very effective things that they were able to do and things that he learned, and really some great strides made in their ministry, particularly in relationships to the Speedway and trust levels with the staff there and so forth. Very, very important stuff. So, Jim, thank you for being on the podcast today. I wish you well with your family. I know your son had some surgery here just a few days ago, and we pray for his speedy recovery. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Roger, for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Well, listen, to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been podcast number 14 for us in the year 2021. My name is Roger Marsh, Executive Director of the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, and we encourage you to look us up online at racewayministries.org. Visit our Facebook page, National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, or you can go to our YouTube channel by the same name and pick up some other podcasts there. But until next time, I just want to say to each and every one of you, we look forward down the way to seeing you in victory lane at the end of the road course of life. And all that, of course, is possible for us because of our faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. So we look forward to having you back at our next podcast. Meanwhile, thank you for listening. We hope you'll tune in next time as we continue to explore Christian ministry and outreach in motorsports through the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. If you'd like to learn more about the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, visit our website at racewayministries.org. Follow us on Facebook under the name National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. Check out our podcast and videos found on our National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries YouTube channel. Meanwhile, thanks for joining us for this presentation of Raceway Ministries Today.